Oh, I see you. Very good. Well, everybody, welcome to our Arborist webinar. My name is Steve. I work at Rockledge Gardens at the information desk. Some of you may already know me. And we have with us today Kerry and Simon Stratford of Stratford Tree Surgery, Stratford Tree Research. And I have to give them the plug. This is the best arborist that I know in the whole county of Brevard here. So let them introduce themselves to you. Hi, folks. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Kerry Stratford. I'm Simon's wife, and we work together as a team. I myself am a certified arborist, and oftentimes when we turn up at jobs, no matter what the job is, whether we're dismantling a tree or doing a consultation, they just look at me and go, "Where's your crew?" And I go, "I'm it." I'm the crew. I work alongside with Simon, and I'm his support team. Although we do have machinery, which I've given names. We have Wizzy, Nifty, and Gordon, who I say are my crew, but they're actually machines. But I myself, like I said, a certified arborist. I have a associate's degree in horticulture, and I will be graduating from UF with my degree in environmental management.
Well, I'm Simon Stratford, as you probably gathered, Kerry's husband. I'm a UK qualified tree surgeon and a certified arborist here, and track qualified. So that's basically me. And as you know, we run Stratford Tree Surgery and the research company as well. And the idea really is that the practical side of the tree surgery is backed up by the intuitive research element that enables us to decide on the practical part of it, what we apply and when. And that really is designed to take the guessing out of what may be going on with the tree or may not be, either physiologically or structurally. And that's something that has come about really since the late sort of 1990s. Before that, we were sort of pigeonholed into guessing and tapping a tree with a hammer and working out what might be going on inside. But the industry's moved on an enormous amount from that. And we've spent a lot of time investing in that technology and learning how to use it to bring tree surgery and tree care in the 21st century.
Well, Kerry and Simon, I'm glad to say I've known you guys for a while now, more than 2 years. And I know your work very well because, as you both know, you've done a lot of work on my trees. And I have learned so much from you. And after 21 years working at Rockledge Gardens, I don't think I learned as much about trees and their care as I have in the short time that I've known you two. So, and my customers that I have recommended you all to, always sending me back, thank you, thank you, thank you. You did such a wonderful job. You guys really know what you're doing. So if you don't mind, let's start off with some questions. My first one is, what actually is a tree surgeon?
Okay, so a tree surgeon is a qualification as opposed to a certification. So it's something that once you're qualified, it's for life. It's not a reoccurring CEU requirement, as is the case with a certified arborist. So in the UK, we attend agricultural colleges, and these courses are provided by a body called LANTRA, which provides all land-based curriculum and structures learning. So when you're working on the land, whether it be in agricultural, whatever type of machinery, they structure the courses to make sure that there is a learning ability to keep you safe. Once you start going through these courses as a tree surgeon, they're broken down into segments. So we may have 20 to 25 different segments teaching you how to use chainsaws, how to fell trees, small, medium, large, climbing, aerial rescue. It's pretty involved. And then at the end of each section, you're assessed by a national assessor from the National Proficiency Training Council. You have to pass that to move on to the next stage. So at every stage, you are assessed and passed, and then you get a little credit card size credit card. I suppose not a credit card, but a certification, which shows you that you're certified to do that. Now, that is very important because in the UK, unless you're a qualified tree surgeon, you cannot touch a tree. You can't prune it, you can't cut it, you can't dismantle it.
Wow.
And there are big penalties for it. This is all sort of bound into legalities which were provided by the Town and Country Planning Acts, which came in the 60s when the UK was rebuilding after the Second World War and redeveloping all these new areas for people to live. So all of what we do in the UK and learn is enshrined within that Town and Country Planning Act, which preserves trees, tree preservation orders, everything. And we're governed by the HSE, which is the Health and Safety Executive, which is a bit like your OSHA over here. So unless we are wearing the correct equipment, chainsaw trousers, helmets, using saws in the correct way, they visit us on site and you're fined on the spot and or prosecuted. So the legal framework around it is part of what designates our training as a tree surgeon.
Well, I learned a lot from that. I didn't realize, first of all, once a tree surgeon, always a tree surgeon.
Yes.
That I didn't realize. And that the difference between a tree surgeon, is there such a thing as a certified arborist in England, or is that only in the United States?
It's outside of the UK and Australia. So Australia has tree surgeons as well. Outside of that, the International Society of Arboriculture, the ISA, was structured to try and provide a unified framework of learning. But it is a computer-based exam. You're required to spend a certain amount of time of practical learning in the field independently. But ultimately it is a computer-based exam, whereas as a tree surgeon, it's practical and theoretical. So there's quite a bit of difference. And then you have to maintain a certain amount of CEUs within a 3-year period. I believe it's 30.
Yeah, 30 and 3.
To hold your certification relevant. Yeah.
So is that for a tree surgeon? I thought you said tree surgeons didn't need CEUs.
No, that's for a certified arborist. Yeah.
So does your making as a tree surgeon, how does that equate over here to the United States? Are you recognized as something a little different than than a certified arborist, or what's the difference? What's a certified arborist?
Well, I think for those that know how the UK is structured, when they hear you're a UK tree surgeon, there is a big difference for them with a level of training. For a certified arborist, you're really left to do your training yourself or find avenues that will provide the training. So it's a very different process. An arborist really is just someone who works in the field of arboriculture, which is anything to do with trees. An arboriculturalist in the UK is something very different. And that's where we go as tree surgeons onwards mentally, where we independently decide whether we're going to start learning in depth of physiological behavior of trees, the biological, everything else. So the degree of learning that you undertake onwards really then is a very independent thing on both sides, as a certified arborist and a UK tree surgeon. Yeah.
So how do I know if a person I've engaged to help me with my trees actually is a certified arborist? And can I also say, is there any way of knowing how much I can trust them? Because it seems like there's a very big difference. It seems like you guys are better trained to deal with trees, and there seems to be theoretically, I think, a better understanding that trees need good care in England, Australia, outside of the United States. Is that true?
For the latter part, I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, there is an awful lot of talent in the US. I think, unfortunately, most of it tends to be centered in the northern area of North America, in those states.
But they have more regulation there.
Yeah, there is more regulation.
I see.
But it's a great question, Steve, and it's a bit of an angst for me when people term themselves as arborists and go knocking on doors. And the only way that you actually know whether that person is a certified arborist is he will carry a card. It has his name on it. It has his certification number on it. I mean, I have got mine, which I'll stick up, and I don't know whether you can view that.
Yeah, I can see that.
That is what the certified arborist should be able to present to you when you talk to him. And you need to match that person with the name on that card. The practice tends to be certified arborist, but is that certified arborist the person that's actually working on your tree, as opposed to unqualified individuals that are sent out as crew?
Or someone who's just in the office that's a certified arborist.
So is there a database online where you can match up the name to a
Yes, there is. Yeah, so if you go to isa.org, you can search by town or by the individual's name, and it will pop up and it will tell you who the certified arborists are in your area and whether they are currently within certification.
Yeah, and there's it's the ISA.
ISA, International Society of Arborists?
Arboriculture.
Arboriculture, so isa.com.
No, .org. O-R-G.
.org.
Yeah.
And then there's another website called treesaregood.org.
Treesaregood.org, love that. Well, moving on, that really clears things up. I didn't realize that you really should match up their qualifications, and you had a good ID card that you could match up to a website, so that's important to know. So my next question has to do with, we get so many questions about trees at work, and I've been listening to them for years and years. I have a problem with my tree. I don't think it's healthy. Is my tree healthy? How do you determine when you go to see a person's tree whether or not it is healthy or not? What's the sign of health for a tree?
Okay, so there are two parts to that answer, and it has to do with the way that a tree grows. So when you're looking at for the purposes of this, we're talking about a broadleaf tree, a dicot, and when you're looking at a broadleaf tree such as an oak, only approximately 8% of what you're looking at is actually live material. 92% of that tree is dead material.
Wow.
So the live material principally is the outer ring. If you cut across the cross section and you count the rings for each year of the tree's growth, the outer ring is the current vascular system. That grows the periderm, and the periderm grows the bark layer, which is the protection against the outside environment for the tree. And then the leafage at the ends, which produce the food for the tree through photosynthetic process. So that part is the 8%. So if the leafage is green and the very outer extents of those tips are all covered in leafage and they're not dead ends, then reasonably you could say that physiologically the tree is healthy. Now, as the tree gets bigger and bigger, those previous vascular systems, which are no longer being used, those areas, consist of hard structural material made of cellulose and lignin. Those remain as the main support areas for the tree. Now, as long as those are entire and intact, so that 92% is not compromised, then the structural health of the tree is complete. The problem comes when the bark layer is compromised either through big pruning wounds or storm damage, and bacterial pathogen can then get into that part and it starts living inside those old woody tissues, and secondary causal agents make homes in there, and it starts degrading that 92%, then the structural health of the tree starts being compromised, and then you have to look at where that may be.
So if I can interject here, this is why it's important for two things, if I'm not mistaken, not to prune branches of a tree right against the trunk, and also to be careful not to damage the outer bark with a weed eater, for example, because the living tissue is right under the trunk, correct?
Absolutely right. I mean, with weed eaters or weed whackers, typically it's a very young tree, so 100% of the cross-section is still alive. It's not old enough for the tree to close it off. Once you actually trim away that outer part and you ring the tree, no vascular flow can move from the lower part above that area. That's it, the tree's gone. So far as cutting close to where the branch is attached, you're absolutely right. There's a swollen area called a collar, and that has a chemical in it, and the tree can detect problems in the outer branch, and it will close the vascular system off at that collar and stop intrusion into the live area of the tree. If you cut that off, it loses that. Yeah.
So that's, I never realized how even the supposed dead part of the tree is very important for the structural integrity of the tree.
Yes.
Did anything else harm that formerly living part of the tree? Can that, if you don't cut too close and if you don't wound it, can anything else bore into it or hurt the structural part of the tree?
Yes, I mean, you know, trees are living environments, and that's what they exist for. They're not just for our pleasure. So they provide a home for all sorts of invertebrates, and just through fast growth in a tree, which produces a thinner bark layer and stretching, it can provide a compromised area through which those secondary causal agents can get in. And of course, they're surrounded by, like us, millions of bacteria and virus that would like to come in and live. And they do. But the tree can cope with that up to a certain point, as we can. And, you know, all life came from single cell organisms, of which they are. So arguably, trees, as well as us and everything else that is animate and lives on the planet, are hosts to living single cell organisms that start life.
But if I can interject there, I mean, when you talk about the tree health, and Simon was talking about the structural health and the physiological health, you can have a physiological healthy tree, but it be structurally unhealthy. And you can have a structurally healthy tree, but a physiological unhealthy tree. So, or you could have both, you know, both good or both bad. So it's something that, you know, we're able to test for. You know, we can look inside the tree using sonic tomography and be able to, what I say, take the, you know, the unknown and make it known by being able to see inside the tree with a tree scan, like you do a, you know, MRI scan inside the body. And we can test the physiological health to see if there's a decline in its health through chlorophyll fluorescence testing to see if it's working properly. Because you can test if it's not working properly, you know something is starting to go awry with the tree. So there are ways of testing it, but that's something to always, you know, you might think your tree's healthy, but structurally sound, it may not be. So it's always something to look at.
So there's a lot more to the health of the tree than just the structure or just the physiological aspect. It's the whole combined things.
That's right.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, my next question has to do with something I hear all the time. I want to put a tree in my yard. I ask them, how big do you want it to get? Most people aren't sure. How do you find the right tree for the right place? How do you advise someone, for example, their yard is smaller than the tree you know they want to put in there, or the yard can handle something a little better? What do you have to say about the question, the right tree for the right place?
Well, I think the very first thing that you should do, because a tree is an investment, not just a financial investment, but you don't want to plant something that in 2 years' time is going to fail, or 5 years' time. It has to be taken out. So the very first thing really is a soil test. You should test the soil, because no matter what tree you want to put there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the soil or the amendment that exists will support that tree. Even though you're in 9B, it depends what the construction company have put underneath your sod, and it may not support it. So that's the very first thing, and the pH is very important, because you can alter pH for limited periods of time, but the soil will always want to revert back, so you end up tipping your wallet into the ground, and that's not a good idea. So
before you go further,
yeah.
Another question I get all the time is, how do I test my soil? Now, the University of Florida does a test, but it's nowhere near complete enough for what you're talking about. And up till now, I've been referring people to a place called Logan's Lab online, because they do a more comprehensive test. Do you guys test soil?
Yes, we do.
We do, and it's a very comprehensive test. We can test water as well, and we can test for any suspected presence of a particular chemical within the tree system. So if we suspect something that's being put on the ground may be the cause of stress, we can test for that individual metal in the tree.
So I should be referring these people to you all in the future. I didn't realize we had that locally. You were able to do that, because up till now we was always send away. That's very good to know. But go ahead with the rest of your answer. First of all is the soil. What's next?
Yeah, so the next thing is you have to know what the eventual growth habit of the tree is going to be. And that dictates where you put it. So you have to watch for power lines and obviously your property. So ideally you want a tree that at reasonable maturity will still fit without causing problems around your home and cracking driveways and sidewalks and such like. Now, having said that, we do have a lot of trees, especially in Europe, that are enormous genetically, but are pruned to fit within their urban environment. And that really is where our skill as tree surgeons come in. And it is all about making a tree fit within the urban environment. So formative pruning is extremely important. And as the word dictates, that is pruning the tree as it forms. So you can prune it and keep it at a shape and a size that fits the environment without waiting for it to grow and then having to cut into large sections of wood, thereby inducing decay into those areas which are no longer cellularly alive. So we actually train it as we go to fit. Now, when you do that, it will produce reactive growth because genetically it wants to get to a certain size, and you do have to manage that. And it's one of many architectural types of prunes, but you have to be, it is a maintenance prune, and not many people like maintenance prunes because it involves financial outlay on a reasonably regular basis.
But the first 10 years of a tree's life is vital in the urban environment, and pruning it to fit. Because once you go through that first 10 years, and then it has its shape. So that's the main thing when you plant a tree. You want those first 10 years of pruning it to fit.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
You're also pruning out those wayward crossing over branches that later on will become pleached and rubbing on each other. So you're formatively pruning for a lot of things. Even if you've got a tree planted in an area where you can afford to let it grow to full height and range, you still need to formatively prune it to make sure that the structure is there, because unfortunately, as you know now, most of the trees you're going to purchase are hybrid versions, and they all tend to display the same types of characteristics, and you have to really hunt to find ones with the correct type of union at the start that will grow to support its genetic size.
So you really are better off doing a little research first. If you've got a certain piece of property, you want to buy a tree within a certain range that you're not going to have to worry about roots destroying your foundation or driveways. So you really should pay attention to how big something is going to grow. So many people, you know, in my own property, my father had no consideration. He put all these camphor trees in, and now I'm being attacked by camphors front and back, you know.
Yes.
The roots scare me. But so it really pays to do your research ahead of time. And you should buy the right size tree for the place you're putting it, correct?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, obviously centres such as yourselves, Steve, and your information centre are vital for people to come along and just ask before they buy.
One of the first things I ask them, how big do you want it to get? How big of a space do you have to grow it in, you know?
Yeah.
But people already have an idea in their head, oh, I want this, you know, and they already visualized it, but what they haven't visualized is all the problems they're going to have 15, 20 years down the road because they picked the wrong tree.
That's right, yes.
So then they're going to want to top it. And can you address that question next? Because that's a big question. Can I top my tree? I can prune it. People want a crepe myrtle, for example.
Yes.
And you know, crepe myrtles grow to all different heights, unlike other trees. There's so many varieties. So I'm going, well, let's find the right one for you. Well, no, I want that one with that flower. I said, that gets 20 feet tall and you get an area where you'd be better off with one that's 10 feet tall. Well, I'll just cut it at 10 feet. I'm going, well, no, you really can't do that, you know? Can you address that question?
Yes.
About topping a tree and should you top it?
Right. So we tend to use different terminology in the UK.
Structural reduction?
Structural reductions, yes. It sounds a lot better, doesn't it? I think it's probably fair to say that you can do anything you like to a tree. You can create any shape that you want to create, as you can see on many of the formal gardens in the UK, in Europe, where you start having Belgian fences of all different types where you can train long leaders along a wall. It's how many fruits are grown in France because of area restrictions, and they just don't have the ability to produce on a large scale and allow those trees to grow to their full potential. So they're structured. And also it allows for multiple trees to be put in so that if you get a failure of one tree, you're not losing such a big canopy, you've got others alongside it. So it changes it. Certain trees will take reductions better than others. So faster growing trees have less dense wood, and therefore when you are putting reductions into them, the fibres are not as compact and they don't resist decay as well as those that grow slower. Now, you mentioned crepe myrtle. It's an excellent tree to do all sorts of architectural prunes to. And I've heard all sorts of phrases, crepe myrtle and all this type of thing. There is nothing wrong with reducing crepe myrtles to produce a certain type of shape and keep them confined. Once you cut into the original growth of a tree, it is going to react to try and replace genetically the leafage and the leaf area that it needs. It will therefore produce a different type of growth. That is what we call an epicormic chute, and that is produced from an apical bud that is laid down by the tree in the center of the branch during its first year of growth to be used as an emergency should it lose part of its structure. You will notice that they don't grow out at a nice 45-degree angle. They normally pop out at 90 degrees and all sorts of ways. So you're inducing a tree to react to stress, and it's going to produce a lot of heads, a bit like a bush. We do it to a bush to get it to fill out. Well, a tree is no different. It's going to fill out, but then what you have to do is you have to prune those leaders to produce one particular leader, and you can cut it again and that will produce more out of that. So you can produce more of an open fanned type of structure, but smaller. Now, I think we worked on one of your trees where
My jacaranda.
yes, where had actually been topped. So
I know. Before you came
is,
along.
Yeah, topping is sort of an indiscriminate reduction in height. What you want to create is, if you stand back and look at a tree, and any tree, it has mostly what we call a decurrent shape, like this. And it's designed to shed wind from the top down through its outer edges and push down on those lower branches, creating stability. So when you structurally reduce a tree, or you pollard, which is something we mentioned, you're looking to reduce it down in height but keep that shape. And I often liken that to taking a balloon, letting the air out of the balloon, and it shrinks in shape but keeps its shape. And that's what you're looking to do with a tree. So you're looking to take the air out of the bottom and reduce the canopy down but keep its structural integrity. So pollarding is a little bit more severe, and we do that particularly to produce now those leaders or those runners. And in France, you get parking lot areas where that's done, and the trees runners are joined together, which is called pleaching, which comes from the French pléchier, to join. And you get a parking lot when they join together in the leafage, you get a whole canopy of leafage. So the parking lots are covered just in a whole canopy of tree at a low level, which is very sort of cooling. So we use these for specific purposes. And for us, in Europe, they go back a long, long way, back to Iron Age days, with laying hedges and coppicing, which is cutting trees near the base, and it will regrow these epicormic shoots, particularly with ash trees, because ash was used for the longbows in battle, and they needed a steady supply of wood and shelters and everything else. So different trees take better to different types of pruning, if you like.
So in general, for most of the people that are listening to us, if you can, if you do decide to reduce trees, there is going to be a financial aspect to this, because you're going to have to continue to deal with it every year, or like you told me with my jacaranda, every other year. So this is going to be something you're going to have to revisit again and again. If you want to avoid that, we're back to the original question: buy the right tree for the right spot.
Absolutely right. I mean,
but if you do want to reduce them, it can be done.
It can be. Now, I've got to say that, like your jacaranda, every other year, because it's a fast-growing tree. Slower growing trees, probably every 3 to 5 years. The reason for that is that when it throws that leader, which has leafage on it, as you leave it, that leader gets taller and taller. The leafage moves away from the cut, because that's where sunlight is. For that cut to heal, you want to create what we call a pollard knuckle, which is increasing amounts of reactionary material. You want the leafage closer to that cut, so that where food is produced, it's closer to that area and produces that healing. If you let it go like your jacaranda, you end up with what we call a lapsed pollard, where the leafage is further away. It also creates height, weight, and leverage on a weak area, and you don't get that tissue regeneration at the site of the cut.
That's interesting. You called it a pollard knuckle, and I recall a lot of shows I've seen recently. They're usually travel shows in Europe, and especially in Paris and stately, older, expensive homes in Britain. You see big knuckles above the tree where you can see it's been cut way down.
Yes.
And this large tree is growing as a much smaller thing, but especially in the winter when the leaves are gone, you can see those knuckles quite well. So this is something that's got to be maintained, like you said, depending on the growth rate of the tree every 2, 3, 4 years, correct?
That's correct. And the other reason that we do that for bigger trees is where We have one in our local neighbourhood actually. It's quite an old laurel oak, which only lasts about 60 years. And it's got a lot of fungal pathogen moving up from the root base and eating away at the starts of the main structure. So what we've done is we've done a severe structural reduction, which induces early decay. So we've got a lot of reactionary growth, but it's shrunk the canopy. And now we've got light and air coming to the outer two sides of it. And we've planted new oaks either side of it, so they can get light to grow straight. As they grow, then we reduce the old one further. But the importance in keeping it there is that it is already binding a lot of soil nutrient and microbes in the soil. And as we now know, trees exchange carbon between themselves to help the younger ones grow. So that old tree will be giving carbon surpluses to the young trees that are in deficit at the moment, helping them get a foothold and to grow. And eventually they will take that over, and that tree will be returned to the soil, which essentially is what topsoil is. It's decayed woody matter.
So we really haven't discussed it here, but a question I'm getting a lot of, especially now, is fertilizing trees. How should and how, yes, should people be fertilizing their trees, especially considering the very poor soil we have here in Florida?
I suppose my intuitive answer to that is no. When they're young, yes, to a degree, but a tree, the thing I always remember being taught is that a tree has to get its feet down in the soil in which it wants to grow. If the soil is not going to support that particular tree, when it gets to maturity, these trees are taking upwards of 40 gallons of soil solution per day out of the soil.
Wow.
You cannot tell which nutrients it needs at what time. And it is impossible to fill your whole yard with enough nutrient for that tree to take, because an oak will feed in 1,000 square feet. And it's an impossibility. So again, as you mentioned, right tree, right place. Soil sample to start, and you make sure that your soil can support your tree, and then leave the tree to its own devices. When they start, you do have to help them, a degree of watering and a degree of fertilization, but they have to find their own way, a bit like our kids.
Well, as long as we're talking about pruning trees and caring for them, another often asked question has to do with hurricanes. Right. Now, before I met you all, I had certified arborists go into my trees. They spent the whole day thinning my tree out, supposedly to let the hurricane winds pass through the branches. I've since learned from you all that's not necessarily a good thing. Can you address the question, should, and if I do, how do I hurricane-proof a tree?
Okay, so when we first arrived 9 years ago, I heard this mantra, and it worried me, because I said to Kerry at the time, I thought, oh no, I said, what on earth do we do? Is this right? And I had this real struggle because it was the complete opposite to everything I've learned. So I did a lot of research, and thankfully I came back with the answer that I arrived here with. So the first thing I would say is that a tree never grows anything that it doesn't need. That's the first thing that you have to remember. The second thing is that the sole objective, bar nothing else, for a plant or a tree is to capture light. If it can't capture light, it can't photosynthesize and create food for itself and live. So before you go cutting off anything, you have to bear in mind the tree has grown it for a reason. So then we come to why. So trees have been around on the planet 350 to 400 million years. So they sort of figured out what they need to do and what they need to grow. And they grow in all sorts of climates and all sorts of weather systems. So hurricane proofing, I've got to say to you that there is no such thing as hurricane proofing a tree. So everything that a tree grows is used to dampen the force of wind down. It's called mass damping. So the ends of branches go lots of different ways. And the reason for that is that when wind hits that canopy, it breaks up and dissipates the force of the wind. If everything went the same way, it creates a lot of pressure. So as soon as wind starts hitting the canopy, and it's strongest at the highest point, not low down, then the tree starts spreading it around its canopy, which is why it has this decurrent shape. It sheds it down. And it sheds it down, and those lower limbs that are cut off by individuals are the ones that stick out the furthest, and they're the heaviest ones. That wing comes down the canopy on a shedding basis and pushes down on those limbs. And those limbs create weight and downforce that balance the tree in the ground. So I liken it to a crane. We've all seen the YouTube videos, and the crane has its jib raised up high and it has its outriggers low down, and that stabilizes it. But if it's carrying too much weight and there's a wind, as it starts to turn, then the crane topples over. And if you think of a tree, when it has a high wind, it starts to bend it. If those outriggers have been taken off at the bottom, you're going to force the tree over. So those lower limbs are very, very important. Now, the inner structure of the tree that people address through a process of supposed thinning add to that damping effect. So wind passes in amongst all those as well, and the whole process is called mass damping. Now, once wind gets up to about 90 miles an hour, the tree will release the leafage at the petiole. That's why you end up with so many leaves on the ground. Once those leaves have come off of the tree, there is no drag. You've got an open structure. So the tree has figured out how to do this. Now, with trees close to homes, when you've got winds that start accelerating to 120 miles an hour plus, it's a challenge for any tree, but it is also a challenge for most roofs. So I've got to say that, you know, trees around properties do save these roof lines from a lot of potential damage.
10 to 50%.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So they're an enormous help. And as long as they are pruned correctly and in the right way, they afford a lot of protection. And on that note, contrary to insurance companies, I don't know whether there's anyone from the insurance company logged on here, but you need limbs tracking over your roof line, and you don't want to lift them too far away. You want them far enough away so they're not banging on the roof in winds, but the further you move them away, if there is a failure, the further it has to travel. So mass times velocity equals force. With that distance it has to travel, it gathers more force, and the force of impact is much bigger. So you take an oak that weighs about 70 pounds a cubic foot. Every 4 foot that limb travels, it quadruples its weight. So you've got, per cubic foot, 280 pounds of force moving towards your roof line. So you need them closer, and you need those nice ends which are dynamic. They're alive, so they flex. So if they make contact, they flex and they absorb the impact.
So we definitely don't want to be thinning out our trees for a hurricane.
We do thin out in the UK as tree surgeons, but that process affects the outer canopy, where sometimes it gets a bit blocky and a bit lumpy, where it's moving away from homes trying to get light, and it gets a bit heavy. So we thin that edge out so that it behaves more correctly the way it should do. That is actually thinning.
The outer canopy, not the inner canopy.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the last question I have on my list for that I get asked a lot by people, and I've heard again and again over the years, there's a hole in my tree. Sometimes it's caused by woodpeckers or some animal, or sometimes, you know how in the crotch of a tree there's a little hole and water collects?
Yes.
I want to put cement in it so that it stays dry. I want to put some rubber or glue or this or that, and for that matter, if you don't mind addressing the question of pruning paint as well, Because what I've read over the years is pruning paint tends to introduce more problems than it solves. But more concerned, can you plug holes in a tree? Should you be applying things to holes, filling them in?
Right, so the short answer to that is no. We stopped doing that over 20 years ago in Europe. The main reason is given the more advanced research now that's taken place, the more we know about trees. Firstly, a human cell has no walls to it, whereas a tree's cellular structure has walls. So the way in which it interacts is through osmosis and reverse osmosis, through those cellular walls. When you apply a substance into a hole where the tree is trying to compartmentalize and seal that area off to stop pathogen moving into the structure, by putting that product in there, whatever it may be, expandable foam, builder's foam, or concrete, or whatever it may be, it gets between those cellular walls and it stops the interaction between the cells to compartmentalize and seal the area. Once you have a hole, a tree can only compartmentalize and perhaps encapsulate it and carry on growing. That hole will always be there, although it will fill it with material over time as it compartmentalizes. But once you put a product in there, that slows the process down and causes a bigger problem. So the short and the explanation answer to that is no. You have to really look more at why is there a hole in my tree? What's caused it? It may be an inherent structural fault in the tree as it grew, which has allowed water and debris to collect. And then bacterial pathogen has set up and started moving down and living off of the fibers, creating a cavity. Well, if that is in the included part of the tree where the canopy starts, that can be quite serious. As the canopy gets bigger, the leverage is higher up, it exerts a greater amount of force in that area. And that is where the structural reductions come in, because by reducing the structure, you take away the force and the amount of leverage exerted on the area that is suffering decay. So you can make the tree last longer and stop these fatal separations of half of the trunk. But you've got to know to look for them. And as Kerry said, that's where the sonic tomography comes in the scans. We can scan trees through their cross-section to see how much of that area has been exposed to pathogenic decay and could therefore cause a structural health problem for the tree and then warrant a structural reduction. So going back to what I said right at the start, you know, the introduction of these scientific elements to help us intuitively know where and how we apply our skills as tree surgeons and certified arborists when we're looking after the trees. And often too much is done to trees. You know, you often come across, going back to hurricane pruning, every year you get the phone call, I need my tree hurricane proofed, and you see this lovely oak and it's had yet another limb taken off. And well, you're going to run out of limbs soon. And I don't know what to say to that, really.
Well, I see that's the number one way people tend to kill palms is by cutting off too many green fronds.
Yes.
And hurting. What about pruning paint? So many people want to cut a limb and then prune it. Doesn't the tree heal over quickly enough on its own?
It does, Steve. Yeah, but the pruning paints don't assist it. It is the same thing. It's a product that prevents the tree encapsulating the wound and healing. So again, pruning paints are not something in the UK that we've been using for over 20 years now. I know that it is still the practice here, and it is the practice particularly in the fruit growing trade. But it's not a practice that we carry out now.
What about something I just thought of? You see a lot of this, especially in California trees, where they use a white latex on the lower part of the bark, supposedly to keep certain insects off the tree. Is that of any use?
It depends. I mean, a tree, do you remember as a kid, being told that if you scratch the edge of the bark off of a tree, if it's green underneath, it's alive.
I tell people that all the time when they go, my tree is dead. I said, go check it for a scratch.
Okay. So do you know what that green is that you're looking at?
The cambium layer?
No, it's chlorophyll.
Okay.
So the chlorophyll in the leaf appears green. That's when we know it's photosynthesizing. But actually the leaf is not green. It's reflecting green light out of the light spectrum that it doesn't use. So the natural colour of the leaf is those you see in the fall, all those different colours, the reds, the oranges, the yellows. That's just the chlorophyll now present and reflecting green light that it doesn't use. When you scratch that bark off in the newer part of the branch, that green is chlorophyll. So the tree is not only photosynthesizing and growing from the leaf, it is also doing it from the stem. So when you apply paints or outside products to trees, you're closing off those lenticels, those areas through which gas is exchanged for the tree to be able to photosynthesize. Now, in the lower part of the tree, the main trunk, it's probably arguable whether or not the photosynthetic process is really going on down there. It tends to be more at the outer ranges. So applying latex form paints lower down on the trunk, I don't think really does a lot of harm, but you have got to allow that bark layer to expand because the tree is still putting on bulk and that has got to be able to flex. So, but latex is a flexible product. So,
so basically a tree grows everything it needs and we really don't need to be adding most of this stuff, if any of it.
It did pretty well for a long time before we arrived.
Well, those are my questions, and I want to thank you. You guys have taught me. I always learn when I listen to you. It doesn't matter how many times I talk, I learn something new. And I believe we're probably going to have some questions from our attendees.
Okay, hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi Jessica.
Okay, great. Hi. Okay, so if anybody has any questions right now, this is the time to type them in the chat. I'll ask out loud and then we'll get a response. So the first one that I have is, somebody said we have to sadly remove a large oak next to our driveway and on top of pipes and underground electrical. What, if any, can be planted in its place? We don't want to have any issues with utility damage or further driveway damage.
When you trees that rely on subterranean activity to live, namely, their root system gathering nutrient and water below ground, when you've got septic tank areas, fiber optic cables, pipes of any description, there is always inevitably going to be some disruption to it because as the tree grows, it takes more water and nutrient out of the soil. The soil compacts because it has less in it if it's not being replaced through the water table. And anything that is rigid, that is sitting on that compacted soil that can't flex, will crack. So unfortunately, there's not an answer that will happily give you the reason to plant a tree where you've got a lot of underground services that supply the property. I guess my best answer would be to plant it away from those services. And that probably comes back to Steve's original question about right tree, right place. That's not an area to plant a tree.
Okay, great. We did have one on Facebook, but I don't see it any longer. I think the person left the Facebook Live, so I can't see it. So if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to ask now. If you guys want to talk for a few minutes, we'll wait until any other questions might come in.
You mean we can check among ourselves?
Yeah, Steve, if you want to ask a question, or if you want to follow up,
gladly.
if you want to follow up on that question.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on some business matters, if that's okay, as long as we're waiting for questions.
Sure, so, I have one right after you're done.
Very good. Kerry and Simon, at this point, I know you know I send a lot of people your way. As a matter of fact, I sent 2 of them yesterday. Would you rather that they know your phone number and or email, or both?
Either, whichever is easier for them to contact us, Steve. It's
They send me pictures. Can I
Yep.
just say, hey, send these pictures and your questions to enquiries@stratfordtreesurgery.com.
absolutely, yeah. If they go on the website and go to the contacts page, they can put a narrative there and upload any images and click the button and it comes straight to our phones whilst we're on site. So it's especially important if there's an emergency. So
well, I had a customer contact me a week or 2 ago. Oh my God, they rolled in. They were uniforms. They matched their vehicles. This is a professional outlet here, you know. I was so impressed when I first met you guys, because apparently the training in England is very different than here. And I was so amazed at how much I've learned, but I didn't realize that you guys actually were degreed in England. You don't just get certified. You don't just take a quick course and pass it. Although the arborist exam is not easy, it's still not impossible. It's not a college course, and you're not a certified tree surgeon for life, you know?
No, I mean, it's a very good way, starting point. And at least you know that the individual has a certain amount of knowledge, but more importantly for me, it shows a willingness to be invested in what they're doing.
And there are some very good arborists here. I've met them there. But yes, like you said, they're people that have a true interest in trees, and they continue to read and learn about the new research, because the new research is amazing. When you guys came along, up until you came along, I never heard of anybody tapping into trees or doing sound, whatever tests you do, that are just amazing. And I know there's another gentleman that does a spraying service that also has some testing equipment. And that was unheard of 20, 30 years ago, no?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, it was explained to me that if you compare what we know, written relative forms about humans, you could fit that in the Smithsonian Museum. What we know about trees would fit on your bookshelf. Relative knowledge. And probably about what 5 hormone groups in the tree do. There are over 1,000 of them. We only know what 5 of them do. And of those 5, we still don't know what it is in the tree that triggers sending that hormone to go and do its job. So, Kerry and I are a great position in an industry where what we see every day adds to joining up some of the dots. And we come to our own conclusions, and some of them may be right, some of them may not be relevant at this time. I won't say they're wrong, because they're not wrong until there's counter information or data that supports a different theory. But we're in a very unique position in that, because we're actually touching the tree in the pruning cuts we put in at different times of the year, early wood, late wood, how they respond, how different species respond, what's in them. And then we have the scientific equipment to actually look inside them and back that up. I think we're in a unique position, as opposed to just sitting in a resource area. Because I think at this stage, when so little is known about trees, there is no substitute for getting there and getting your hands dirty and digging in the soil. And I can't remember the lady's name. Is it Seward in Oregon?
She's in Vancouver.
Vancouver. There's a lady that's been doing research over the last 30 years, but she has used radioactive carbon isotopes through the root systems of trees, which have shown that they share carbon between themselves.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Is this part of what you read, that trees talk to each other?
Yes. And the mycorrhizae network, the fungi network in the ground that joins these up, And again, I suppose that could lead on to a lot of the chemical products that are put on grass are not favourable to life in the soil, and it inhibits the growth of fungi. And if you have single blade grasses without that mixture of clovers and everything else, it reduces the range and extent of
biodiversity
and the biodiversity in the soil, and it changes its behaviour entirely and lessens the communication ability for these trees.
Wow.
I mean, if you take a teaspoon of soil out of the ground, there are more microorganisms in that teaspoon than people on the planet.
Wow. Fascinating.
So just to continue about, you know, where you guys go and where you're located, somebody asked on Facebook if you guys go to Palm Bay.
Yes.
Yes, we do, yeah.
Do you guys, can you talk a little bit about where you'll go and how to get a hold of you?
Yes, I mean, we don't blanket cover, is probably the word I use. So we don't knock on doors and we don't look to cover every single house in the neighbourhood. We actually range from Stuart in the south up to North Virginia now.
Wow.
Specific clients. So I would say, you know, realistically, there isn't a limit because we still have clients in France and we travel outside of the current COVID issues. We normally travel back once a year to service a couple of old clients with their trees in France. So it is obviously dependent on the amount and the type of work that is there. But yes, potentially there isn't actually a limit.
Okay, and then actually that same person said that their answer, or the question they had previously that they wanted to be answered, they deleted, and I was wondering where it went because you guys answered it. It was regarding fertilization. Yeah,
Okay.
It was regarding fertilization, so she got her answer. I have another question from social media that says, if we removed a large oak tree that's sitting next to our driveway and over multiple underground items, do we need to fully extrapolate the root system too?
No, you wouldn't be able to, firstly. So the critical thing to stop the root system growing, because the root system is the command and control center of the tree. It has the majority of the RNA and DNA in the root system. So you have to separate the plate, which is what the trunk comes from the outlying roots. So there is no more communication. The root system will then die off and decay at the rate that normal woody material would decay at, which could be quite an extensive period of time. And it's not unusual over a long period of time to start seeing depressions in the lawn where the outlying roots underground have gradually died off and ceased to take up that volume. So it's impossible to remove the entire root system without, you know, excavating the whole ground. Kerry.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend if you're removing a tree and you're around a lot of services and you need to have the stump ground, there's a number you phone, 811, and they will for free come out and mark all your services. So, and make sure you have that done prior to the stump grinder coming to make sure that as he stump grinds, he doesn't catch one of the services. So, I mean, that is very, very important if your tree sits amongst a lot of services.
And by services, you're talking about underlying cables and
underlying cables, electric, you know, cable, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and that's a free service.
As long as, if we can entertain another question, because every time I listen, I come up with something else, talking about the horrors of fertilizing. It may be politically incorrect, but I think we're obsessed with lawns in this country, and I don't even think they're practical in Florida, because what we grow as the lawns here, where I grew up, it's considered weeds. So putting all this fertilizer to encourage these weeds to grow as a lawn, are we really doing our trees and ourselves a great disservice by, because it's really killing all the healthy microbes in the soil, isn't it? Well, and I noticed when you fertilize, you don't find earthworms anymore.
No, Kerry is he's going to answer this for you, because this is a topic that's very close to our heart. Oh, the only thing I'll say before she starts answering is that actually lawns or turf, sod in the US is the largest crop under irrigation in the US.
Oh my God.
And what goes on it is completely unregulated because it's in the hands of the general public. So it gives you some idea of the range of product that goes onto it. But Kerry will.
Well, you know, as you said, I mean, the thing, exactly like you said, Steve, grass is a weed. It just depends where you have it, whether it's out in the front. If it grows in your flower bed, it's a weed and you're trying to pull it out. So, you know, to me, I mean, the thing is that we are killing our biodiversity. We're killing the health of our soil, you know, by putting the amount of fertilizers and insecticides, pesticides. I was doing one of my classes, entomology, and I had to do a collection of 50 bugs. Well, great. I'm working in trees and yards every day. This is going to be, I thought, easy, right? Well, there were, I don't know how many times I could count. I'm in someone's yard. I'm thinking at least I get a bug a day out of someone's, you know, people's yards. No, there were actually home environments. I couldn't even find an ant. You know, I mean, that is how sterile our environments are becoming. And then what happens is because you make them so sterile, you will get a virus or a pesticide come in. And next thing you know, it overwhelms your garden, you know. So, you know, we have to be very careful in making sure we keep our soil healthy and create biodiversity. We're big composters, you know. I even addressed the city council, and they had members of Brevard County Council. I had the people from Orlando come over and speak about a community-wide compost program, and you know, where we as a community are recycling our food scraps and using it as that is the fertilizer you want to use on your lawn. That's organic matter. You want pure organic matter that's full of nutrients, vitamins, all the nitrogen, you know, phosphorus, you know, potassium, all that is in compost, and that's what you want to be recycling and putting in your yard. It's the best thing for it. So for me, grass, I mean, you know, we have a load of wildflowers. I mean, our neighbors love us. I mean, we allow the wildflowers and the weeds to grow at this time of year so the bees can pollinate and all that good stuff. And then once you mow it, it's all green.
It's actually my excuse to not have to go out and mow the lawn too often.
It's all green, you know, and you mow it, you wouldn't know the difference unless you're actually going around inspecting. You know, so.
I know I have these folks that come in, quite a few of them. I'm sure you're familiar with those pretty little purplish flowers that grow on the lawn.
Oh, they're beautiful.
That's largely pusley. It's from originally Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, or Mexico. Right. And I think they're lovely. Yeah, I don't want that in my lawn. And I will try to convince them, but then, you know, then if they want the product, we have something that'll kill it, but I'm going, it's healthier than your grass. It doesn't need fertilizer. The weeds are healthier than let them grow, you know, like you said.
Well, my thing is, if you don't want weeds, don't spray them, get out there and pull them out. And that, you know, that is the best way to get rid of them. You pull them out. It's good to be outside. It's good to be with nature. Good exercise. Good exercise, a bit of, what do we call it, grounding? You know, you heard the term grounding. Get your feet out there in the grass, get all the nutrients up through your feet.
But it is an obsession, and I hesitate to bring it up because, especially at work, because people get upset when you talk about their lawns. I was very fortunate when I was young. I lived all over the world, in Asia, in Europe, and the only place I ever saw lawns outside of the United States was in rich manor homes in Europe, and there weren't that many of them. I lived in Poland for 2 years. I never saw one lawn.
No, it is.
And their yards were gorgeous.
Yeah, it is a bit of an obsession here. I'm not quite sure where it came from. I haven't bothered researching that, but
I think it was the rich settlers originally from your country.
probably. We gave you
Because I see those beautiful lawns on British television, you know.
Steve, we've come back to see how you're getting on.
Anyway, it's a good question, and why the strong American attachment to lawn. So I'm very hesitant to bring it up because people get offended.
I suppose it is you know, a totally green lawn is aesthetically a very unified and uniform.
Do you think so? I can't stand them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me. I can't stand to look at them.
It creates a very neat, tidy finish to the front of a house. I see hedges that are cut and the square.
Well, that's another thing. They don't get sun to the bottom, and people are always asking me, how come I have leggy hedges at the bottom?
That's
They don't
right.
realize the solution is simple. Just cut them on a 15-degree angle or so.
Yeah.
They get sun to the bottom and they'll stay full.
Yeah,
But that's something I have. That's something I have no.
Yeah.
That's something I have no problem convincing people to do.
That's
But giving up their grass, that's like
no.
giving up air and water, you know?
Yeah, I think, you know, symmetry is a bit of a preoccupation, and I suppose down here we're living in amongst you know, the space era, and there's a large engineering component down here, and I can understand it completely. But nature does not have symmetry as we understand it, and trying to replicate that creates issues in itself. Either trying to get rid of limbs that I often hear, well, I don't like the look of that one, I want that one taken off. Or, you know.
We also had beautiful lawns that I remember as a child, and it was a beautiful fescue grass grew all over New England. I never remember my father ever fertilizing it. It always looked nice and green. He'd send us kids out in the yard to occasionally pull weeds, and other than that. And so people, I think, especially these engineers, remember Florida grew up in the 60s. So many people moved in from up north, and they brought this love of lawns with them down here, and they tried to recreate it in a place where it's really not practical. I don't think. But anyway, you know, maybe with time.
There you go.
But yeah, I love your. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry. I just wanted to say that we're just past the 1 hour mark. If you guys want to start to wrap it up, the last few comments that I was seeing on social media was just to talk a little bit again about how people can contact you and just things like that. So if you want to wrap up with ways to contact you one more time.
We were just chatting, waiting for more questions, but yeah.
Yeah.
So, hey guys, why don't you just let's carefully review the ways that you guys can be contacted.
Okay.
And again, they can always call Rockledge Gardens. We have it's called Simon Stratford. He's the #1 arborist on our list. Can always ask for his number and contact information at Rockledge Gardens. But for those of you that are here, Simon and Kerry, why don't you give us your contact information again?
Okay. So we don't have any social media outlets. Our only outlet are the websites. So it's Stratford Tree Surgery or stratfordtreeservice.com and stratfordtreeresearch.com. If you hit any one of those websites, you can be taken through to the other. They have a contact page on there. Our email addresses, actually they're a catch-all. So as long as you put at Stratford Tree Surgery or treeservice.com or treeresearch.com, it will find us. And the phone numbers, 321-289-5282 or 321-360-2628. And those really are the main ways to contact us. Outside of that, if you want to go to the isa.org website and put our names in or search for Titusville where we're based, it will pull us up as certified arborists and it will have the contact information and phone numbers there. So there's a number of ways to get hold of us.
And again, you can always call Rockledge Gardens because we have
Absolutely.
you right at the top of our list.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Steve. We appreciate it.
Oh, and thank you both. I've learned so much since I've met you all about my own trees and changed a lot of the ways that I believe based on real science. So thanks again for everything I've learned from you guys.
That's a pleasure. Don't touch those canthers.
I look at those dead limbs and I want to pull them, going, no, just leave them alone. Although I will send you an updated picture of the jacaranda. It's leafing out after this cold winter.
Okay.
And it's looking sad, but it's looking good considering it's not even been a year since you started pollarding it.
Yeah, give it time.
Another year, you said, so
Yeah.
I'll send you pictures.
Okay.
So is that it, Jessica? Are there no more
Yeah,
questions? Are we
That's
finished?
it, guys. That's perfect. Yeah, everything else was regarding, and on social media, people were just saying, how can I get a hold of them? How can I get a hold of them? So we're good, and we're
Awesome.
a little past an hour, so that's perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Steve.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. I'll talk to you all soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.